That night, the Florida sky darkened as the stage lights blazed across the central square. A sea of people, tens of thousands of supporters, waved flags and cheered, creating an electrifying atmosphere that rippled through the crowd like an unstoppable wave. "Make America Great Again" banners fluttered in the wind, reflecting the flashing lights of hundreds of cameras eager to capture every moment. This wasn't just another campaign rally, it was a defining event in Donald Trump's presidential campaign. People had traveled from across the country, not just to hear a speech but to feel the energy, the conviction, and the movement they believed only Trump could ignite. At the center of the stage, the former president stood tall, his voice commanding and unwavering, a seasoned warrior in the relentless battlefield of politics. But tonight, something unexpected was about to unfold. The spotlight was about to shift, not to the man who had led countless rallies before, but to someone who had never stood in it, his son, Barron Trump. In a quiet section of the stage, the 18-year-old stood composed, his tall frame exuding an air of calmness. For years, Barron had remained in the background, a figure of mystery who had never sought attention, never given a public political statement, and rarely even appeared in front of cameras. But on this night, for reasons even he may not have anticipated, the eyes of the crowd and the media slowly turned toward him. In the shadows, a group of journalists from major news outlets whispered among themselves, their cameras already rolling, their microphones switched on. They weren't here for casual press coverage, they had a plan. A calculated effort to push, to provoke, to corner Barron Trump into making a mistake. A single misstep, one hesitant pause, or an emotional outburst would be enough to create headlines that could dominate the news cycle for days. What they didn't know was that Barron Trump wasn't the easy target they thought he was. As the night unfolded, the electric energy of the rally was momentarily interrupted by a different kind of storm brewing just beyond the stage. The speeches from key figures had concluded, and the crowd was eagerly awaiting Donald Trump's headline address. But before he could return to the stage, a group of reporters seized their moment. They had been waiting for this. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones extended forward. The subtle hum of anticipation turned into a pointed, deliberate attack. Their target? Not the seasoned politician who had faced media firestorms for decades, but the 18-year-old son who had spent most of his life away from the public eye, Barron Trump. A journalist stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Barron, can you share your thoughts on your father being accused of dividing America?" For a second, there was silence. Conversations hushed. The weight of the question settled over the crowd like an impending storm. Some faces reflected curiosity, others skepticism. A few were hoping to see a young man stumble under the weight of a public interrogation. Others, loyal supporters, held their breath, silently rooting for him to stand his ground. Standing off to the side was Linda Carter, a veteran journalist known for her relentless, razor-sharp questioning. She had built her reputation on making powerful figures uncomfortable, forcing them into missteps that would become headline news. And in her mind, Barron was no different. He was young, inexperienced, and untested. The perfect prey. She smirked slightly, glancing at her colleagues. "The golden boy won't make it out of this unscathed," she whispered. Then came another question, this time even sharper. "Many believe your father is exploiting his name for political gain. What do you say to those who accuse your family of caring more about power than the American people?" Cameras zoomed in closer. The tension in the air was palpable. The moment was crafted perfectly, a carefully laid trap designed to provoke frustration, to elicit hesitation, to pull Barron into a narrative he couldn't control. The journalists exchanged knowing glances. They had seen this play out before. A young, inexperienced individual thrust into the spotlight, overwhelmed by the pressure, making one wrong move that would be dissected across headlines by morning. But Barron didn't react the way they expected. Instead of stammering or rushing to defend himself, he stood still. A slow, deliberate silence stretched across the space. He didn't look shaken. He didn't fidget or glance nervously at those around him. He simply let the question sit there, allowing the weight of it to linger, not on him, but on the people who had asked it. Then, as if deciding the moment was his to take, he took a slow step forward. He adjusted the microphone, his expression unreadable, his eyes scanning the audience. There was no panic, no retreat. If anything, there was a quiet confidence that had not been anticipated. The media had come expecting an easy takedown. What they didn't realize was that Barron Trump was not going to play their game. He was about to change the rules entirely. The air inside the rally grew thick with tension as Barron Trump stood in the crosshairs of the media, their questions laced with pointed accusations. The cameras remained locked onto him, their lenses hungry for a moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, something they could twist into a headline by morning. But Barron wasn't rattled. Instead, he did something no one expected. Rather than rushing to defend himself or his family, he took a slow, measured breath. His silence stretched, not in uncertainty, but in deliberate control. It was the kind of silence that forced people to lean in, to pay attention. Then, with an almost imperceptible smile, he stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. His first words were calm, steady. "You're asking if I understand politics," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I think the real question is, are we defining a person solely by where they were born?" The journalists blinked, momentarily thrown off. This wasn't the nervous, unprepared response they had been expecting. Barron wasn't avoiding the question, he was steering the conversation into territory they hadn't planned for. He wasn't just answering, he was challenging the premise itself. Linda Carter, the veteran reporter who had orchestrated this moment, leaned in slightly, her brows furrowing. This wasn't playing out the way she had envisioned. Barron wasn't defensive. He wasn't flustered. If anything, he looked like someone who had anticipated every single word thrown at him. Then another journalist jumped in, voice sharper, more aggressive. "Many people believe your father is responsible for dividing this country. Do you deny that?" A question designed to corner him. If he said no, he'd be accused of ignoring reality. If he said yes, he'd be playing into their narrative. It was a classic media trap. Barron didn't take the bait. He glanced out over the crowd, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice unwavering but filled with weight. "This is a great nation," he began, "but the saddest thing is that we've allowed political differences to define our relationships with one another." The room fell into a hush. This was no longer just a response, it was a statement, something bigger than the moment itself. If we truly want to heal, we have to stop turning every conversation into a battle. We have to stop pretending that there's only one way to love America. Even those who had come expecting to see a young man falter found themselves listening, really listening. Because Barron wasn't speaking like a politician. He wasn't throwing out rehearsed lines or attacking anyone. He was appealing to something deeper. Linda Carter, sensing her moment slipping away, fired one last shot. "Can you prove that your family truly cares about America? That this isn't just a game of power?" Barron didn't flinch. He simply turned his head, scanning the crowd, until his eyes landed on a middle-aged couple in the front row, clasped hands, worn expressions, faded shirts that read "Proud American Worker." He stepped closer, lifting his hand in their direction. "I could say a lot of things," he said, "but instead, look at the people sitting right here." The couple stared back, their eyes filled with something unspoken. These two, like millions of others, work tirelessly every day to provide for their families. They are the reason my father is running. They are the reason I am standing here today. For a brief second, the room felt frozen in time. Then, a single clap echoed through the hall. Then another. And another. Within moments, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. The journalists exchanged uneasy glances. They had come to tear Barron Trump down. Instead, he had taken their questions, their accusations, and turned them into a message that resonated far beyond the politics of the night. And for the first time, they realized, they had underestimated him. As the final echoes of Barron Trump's words settled over the room, something unexpected happened. The journalists, who had come prepared to dismantle him, found themselves caught in an unfamiliar silence. Their weapons, sharp questions and calculated narratives, had failed. Instead of a young man crumbling under pressure, they had witnessed an 18-year-old standing firm, not with defiance, but with wisdom beyond his years. The applause started as a single clap, hesitant but genuine. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause, a sound that rippled through the crowd like a wave. Supporters, some of whom had feared that Barron would stumble, were now on their feet, cheering for the young man who had just redefined himself in front of the nation. Barron didn't bask in the applause. He simply took a step back, hands still in his pockets, his expression composed. He hadn't come here for victory. He hadn't come to debate, to attack, or to prove anyone wrong. He had come to speak, to remind everyone, regardless of their political beliefs, that dialogue was not weakness, and that America's strength had always come from the ability to disagree without destroying one another. From the back of the room, Donald Trump watched his son with a quiet, knowing look. He had spent years in the brutal arena of politics, battling the press, standing his ground against relentless opposition. But tonight, he didn't have to step in. Barron had defended himself, not with anger, not with aggression, but with clarity, confidence, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Meanwhile, the journalists, who had started this exchange with smirks and whispers, now shifted uneasily. Linda Carter, the veteran reporter who had led the charge, gripped her microphone tightly. She had spent years grilling politicians, forcing them into uncomfortable corners, exposing their flaws. But tonight, she had been outmaneuvered, not by a seasoned political strategist, but by a teenager who had refused to play her game. Still, she wasn't ready to give up. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the applause. "Barron," she called, trying one last time to regain control, "what do you say to those who believe your family has made America more divided?" Barron nodded slightly, as if he had already anticipated the question. Then, in the same steady voice that had captivated the room, he responded. "I don't believe division comes from one person, one family, or one political party," he said. "Division happens when we stop listening to each other. When we're too willing to believe the worst about someone simply because they stand on the other side of an issue. We can keep pointing fingers, or we can choose something else. We can choose to have a conversation." A hush fell over the room. This wasn't the answer they had expected. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't combative. It was a challenge, one that forced everyone, regardless of their political stance, to stop and reflect. Then, looking directly at the journalists, Barron delivered his final words with unwavering conviction. "This is a great nation. And what makes America great isn't that we all agree on everything. It's that we have the right to disagree. But that right should never be turned into a weapon to destroy one another." For the first time that night, Linda Carter was speechless. No sharp rebuttal. No follow-up. The other reporters, who had come prepared to put Barron on the defensive, quietly lowered their microphones. They had come to challenge him. Instead, he had turned the moment into something far greater, an opportunity to define himself on his own terms. As Barron Trump stepped away from the microphone, the energy in the room shifted. The applause, once sporadic, now thundered through the hall like rolling waves. It wasn't just the sound of support, it was the sound of realization. People had come expecting to hear Donald Trump rally his base, but what they had witnessed instead was the emergence of a young man stepping into his own identity, not as a politician, not as a media spectacle, but as someone who had a voice worth listening to. From the back of the room, Donald Trump watched with quiet pride. He had stood in this very position countless times, facing the press, standing firm under fire. But tonight, his son had done something different. He had taken their toughest questions and answered them not with anger, not with political spin, but with clarity, conviction, and a call for unity. And in doing so, he had turned what was meant to be an ambush into a defining moment. But the moment didn't end there. Outside the rally, the internet had already exploded. Within minutes, clips of Barron's poised responses flooded social media. Some supporters called it a political awakening. Others, even those who didn't align with his father's politics, admitted they hadn't expected such depth from the youngest Trump. Headlines began shifting from their original, pre-written narratives. Instead of "Barron Trump struggles under pressure," the story was now, "Barron Trump's unexpected speech stuns reporters." Meanwhile, the journalists who had tried to corner him now found themselves in an unexpected position. They had come with the intention of exposing weakness, of forcing a reaction that would fuel their headlines. Instead, they had encountered something rare, an 18-year-old who had refused to play by their rules, who had chosen dialogue over division, and who had, in many ways, left them speechless. Linda Carter, the veteran journalist who had led the charge, stood frozen for a moment. The microphone in her hand suddenly felt heavier. She had spent her career dismantling powerful figures, exposing flaws, forcing admissions. But tonight, she had underestimated the young man standing before her. There was no flustered defense. No reckless outburst. Just a calm, composed individual who had answered her toughest questions with wisdom far beyond his years. And that, she realized, was more powerful than any headline she could write. But Barron wasn't done yet. As the room quieted once more, he took one final look at the audience, then back at the reporters who had challenged him. And in a voice that was steady, but filled with meaning, he left them with one last message. We can keep tearing each other down. We can keep turning every disagreement into a battle. But if we do, we aren't just hurting politicians or parties, we're hurting the country we claim to love. America isn't about forcing everyone to think the same way. It's about the freedom to think differently and still find a way forward together. With that, Barron turned and stepped off the stage. The applause followed him all the way out. And as he disappeared into the back of the hall, one question lingered in the air, not just among those in attendance, but across the nation. What can America learn from an 18-year-old? As Barron Trump walked off the stage, the applause still echoed through the hall. But beyond the thunderous claps, something deeper had settled over the crowd, a moment of reflection. This was more than just a campaign event, more than just another exchange between a politician's family and the press. This was a reminder of something that America had, in many ways, forgotten. In the age of viral headlines, social media outrage, and political battles that seem to never end, when was the last time anyone truly listened? Not just waited for their turn to speak, not just searched for something to attack, but actually listened. Barron's words had challenged the room, not in a confrontational way, but in a way that made people stop and think. And that, in itself, was powerful. The moment had started as an attempt to discredit him. A few carefully worded questions, a little pressure, and surely, the young man would crumble. That's what they had expected. Instead, he had flipped the script, not by arguing louder, not by pointing fingers, but by reminding everyone that America wasn't built on silence or division. It was built on conversations. On the idea that even in disagreement, people could still coexist, still build, still move forward together. Outside the hall, the conversation had already begun to spread. Clips of Barron's responses had gone viral, sparking debates across news networks, social media platforms, and dinner tables alike. Some praised his composure, calling it the mark of a leader. Others, still skeptical, wondered if his words would truly make a difference in a country so deeply divided. But one thing was undeniable: people were talking. And for the first time in a long time, they weren't just shouting past each other. And that's where the real question lies, not in what Barron Trump had done that night, but in what would happen next. Because this wasn't just about one 18-year-old facing the media. It wasn't just about one family or one political party. It was about all of us. About the way we speak to one another. About whether we are willing to hear a different perspective without immediately seeking to tear it down. In a world where politics has become a battleground of identities rather than ideas, where people are more eager to win an argument than to understand the other side, Barron's words posed a challenge to every single person listening. What if we tried something different? What if, instead of letting our disagreements define us, we let our shared love for this country unite us? It's easy to criticize. It's easy to dismiss. It's easy to keep the cycle going, to let division win because it's simpler than seeking common ground. But real strength, the kind of strength that builds nations, comes from the ability to stand firm in your beliefs while still respecting the voices of others. And that's what made this moment so powerful. Barron Trump hadn't tried to change anyone's mind. He hadn't told people what to believe. He had simply reminded them that conversations matter. That listening matters. That sometimes, the path forward isn't found in who speaks the loudest, but in who is willing to listen first. So now, the question isn't about Barron Trump. It's about all of us. What will we do next? Barron Trump's unexpected moment in the spotlight serves as a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about who shouts the loudest, but who remains composed under pressure. In today's world, where political and social debates often turn into shouting matches, his response was a lesson in the power of calm, thoughtful dialogue. He didn't attack, he didn't evade, he simply spoke with confidence and reason. This is something we can all apply in our daily lives. In workplaces, in schools, in online discussions, and even within families, disagreements are inevitable. But division isn't caused by disagreement, it's caused by how we handle it. Instead of dismissing or attacking those with different views, we should take a step back, listen, and engage in conversations with respect. Social media has conditioned people to react instantly, but true understanding requires patience. This story also teaches us that people are more than their labels. In a time when society is quick to judge based on background, last name, or political stance, we must remember to see individuals for their ideas, their values, and their character. If an 18-year-old can remind us of this, maybe it's time we start applying it ourselves.